This is stage 12, frog sleep. First pass for today. Thank you. Go ahead. Uh, 17.8 miles. So we're looking at a long spawn crest 100, left 5 plus, kinks 120, and then a bunch of 6s and 5s, with some straights. Hey guys.
Hello.
Thanks for working and standing out here for hours with nothing happening.
You guys help.
See you guys. We are armed and dangerous. So long spawn crest 100, left 5 plus, kinks 120, less than 30. 15. 10. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Nice. Long spawn crest 100, left 5 plus, kinks 120. Spawn crest into a left 6, into spawn crest 70, right 5 minus, left 6 plus, 200. Right 6 plus, left 6 into right 4 plus, no cut opens. Into a left 5 plus, into spawn crest, into right 6, into left 4 plus. Right 6 over spawn crest long, 70. Right 5 minus 70. Left 5 opens over crest, 50. Repeat, left 5 opens over crest, 50. Right 6 into left 6 long, 50. Turn right 4 minus. Repeat, left 6 long, 50. Turn right 4 minus, 50. Left 5 over jump. Into right 6 plus over small crest. Into right 5 loose. Left 5 long. Into right 6. Left 5 minus 200. Right 6 plus short over small crest into a left 6 plus over crest 50.
Next.
Turn right 5 minus 50. Small crest into a right 5 plus long. Into crest mid down. Into left 5 into right 6 into caution left 5 over jump into right 4 50. And a left 5 minus over big crest 70 chicane right entry. Repeat, left 5 minus over big crest. Chicane right entry. Left 4 over big crest into a right 5 minus, no cut. Opens tightens 5 plus. 100. This is opens tightens. Stay left over crest 50, chicane right entry. Right 3 minus 600. Left 5 plus 70, flat crest 150, very long crest 100. right 6 long, slowing over small crest into chicane right entry. It says a long, very long crest, 100, right 6 long, slowing over small crest into chicane right entry. Right 5, left 5, into small crest 70, right 5 plus 70, next. Small crest into right 6 plus 200. Small crest 50, left 5 minus into flat crest 300. Repeat, left 5 minus into flat crest 300. Small crest 70, right 6 plus 50, chicane right entry. Repeat, small crest 70, right 6 plus 50, chicane right entry. Right 5 minus into turn right 3 minus tidy. Repeat, right 3 minus tidy. Left 4 plus 120. Left 6 plus 200. Long small crest into a left 4 minus, very long. Into right 5 plus 50. Repeat, right 5 plus 50. Stay left over small crest 120. Small crest into a left 4 minus, no cut. Into right 4 minus. Into left 5 plus, into turn right 2 plus, no cut. 250. Small crest 70, left 5 over small crest long 180. Repeat, 180. Sorry. Yep. This is your 180, caution turn left 2 plus tidy. Repeat, caution turn left 2 plus tidy. 200. Triangle. Small crest into right 5, into crest, into left 6, very long, 350. Just gun it. Go, go, go. Push. 350. Right 6 plus 250. Into caution right 5 plus, chicane right entry.
Alright, take it easy here.
No problem. Chicane right entry. Oh, car off. 100, turn left 4, no cut. They're okay. Into flat small crest 250, right 5 minus, double caution 50, left 4 into turn right 2 over crest. Repeat, 50, left 4 into turn right 2 over crest. Right 2 over crest, 50. Right 6 plus, stay out, chicane left entry. Repeat, chicane left entry. 150. Right 6 plus, into left 5 over small crest, 250. Right 6 plus, 50. Right 6 very long, 70. Next. Left 6 tightens. Repeat, left 6 tightens, right 5 minus, 200. Right 5 minus 200. Right 6, 250. Left 6 plus over small crest into right 5. Into crest 70. Left 5 extra long over small crest 50. Rough into right 4. This is extra long. Yep. Rough into right 4 plus. Into stay left over small crest 120. Left 6 plus into caution right 4 tightens 3. Repeat, caution crest or left 6 plus, into caution, right 4 tightens 3. Into small crest, into left 5, 70. Right 5 plus over small crest, into left 4 very long, into right 5 over small crest 70. Left 5 minus over long crest 50, small crest 50. Repeat, 50, small crest 50, right 3 long, go. 400. Stay left over long crest into jump 70. Stay left over small crest 50. Left 6 plus into right 6. Left 6 tightens and opens over long small crest into chicane right entry. Repeat, left 6 tightens and opens over long small crest into chicane right entry. Turn left 3 minus, no cut. There's your left 3 minus, no cut. Right 4 minus, 50. Left 6 extra long, into small crest, into left 5 minus long, opens over small crest 50. Right 4 no cut 100. There's your right 4 no cut 100. Small crest 150. Turn right 3 plus. Left 6 plus, long over small crest 150. Flat small crest 150. Right 6 plus into right 5 minus 70. Left 6 over jump 100, chicane right entry. Jump 450. Left 5 plus, opens very long, into very long crest 250. Repeat 250, caution, big jump down 200s. Here's your 250, big jump down 200. Right 6 plus, no cut, into slow over small jump, into left 6 over double small jump, 250. Small crest into a left 6 plus, into right 6 plus over small crest 350. Right 6 over crest 70.
Next.
Right 5 minus over crest down 200. Repeat, right 5 minus over crest down 200. Right 6 over small jump 120. Small crest 70. Right 6 over small jump 450. Chicaned right entry. Repeat, 450, chicaned right entry. Left 4 over crest long 70. Jump down 150. Turn right 1 around barrels. Right 6 120, left 6 50, right 6 300. Left 6 plus 50, left 5 plus, into right 6 250. Repeat.
Repeat it.
Left 5 plus, into right 6 250. right 6 into flat small crest, 200s. Small crest into right 5 plus, rough starts, 100, small crest 50. Right 5 plus, over crest tidy, repeat tidy, 150. Stay left over small crest, into right 6 plus, into a left 4 minus 120. Turn right 4 minus very long, 450. Repeat 450 over double small crest, left 5 100s. Mid small crest 50, caution left 5 over jump opens 250. Repeat left 5 100, mid small crest 50, caution left 5 over jump opens 250. There's your caution. Right 6 plus, left 6 plus, 180. Left 5 minus, 300. Repeat, left 5 minus, no cut, 300. Mid small crest, 120. Chicane right entry. Small jump 150, flat small crest 100, flat long crest 300, right 6 plus over small crest 50, flat small crest 250. Repeat, right 6 plus over small crest 50, flat small crest 250. Left 5 plus, very long, go 200. Flat small crest, 200. Repeat, 200, flat small crest, 200. Stay right over small crest, 70. Small crest into a left 6 over crest, 100. And a caution crest into right 6 plus short into jump down. Repeat, caution crest into right 6 plus short into jump down into left 6. Right 5 minus, 180. Left 5 plus over small crest into right 5 plus over finish. Good job.
Roger.
Wow, that was fun.
More fun than a video game? Don't be silly. Be still my beating heart. Here you go.
Thank you.
Get out there.
Okay, go ahead.